Good morning. Let me welcome all of you to the Wilson Center this morning. I'm delighted to have with us a former fellow of the Wilson Center, who actually will be discussing the work he undertook when he was a fellow while he was here. I've known Maina Kiei for many years, going back to this time when he was headed up the Africa division of Amnesty International. In more recent years, he has served, he's currently strategic advisor for the Movement of Political Accountability, an organization that brings together groups in Kenya that seeks to build greater accountability into the political system. He's a former advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a former chairman of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. He's a founding executive director of the Kenyan Human Rights Commission, a local NGO where he spearheaded the revitalization of the constitutional reform process in Kenya. And he's published extensively on various issues of social justice. He holds a bachelor from the University of Nairobi, a diploma in law from the Kenya School of Law, and a master of law from Harvard Law School, where I think that someone by the name of Barack Obama was a classmate of his at the same time. And he had called me some time ago because he was very intrigued by the style and the mode of Barack Obama's campaign, and wanted to kind of investigate, the potential applicability of lessons that could be learned from the way that campaign was conducted, his approach to politics, to conflict for Kenya. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome you again to the Wilson Center and look forward to your remarks. After about 15-20 minutes, we'll open it up for questions from all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Howard, and thank you for this chance, and also thank you very much for hosting me as a fellow here last year. And we changed the subject of my fellowship almost the last minute. When I first came, we were going to talk about the role of civil society in Kenya. But then when the Obama phenomenon hit, and given the issues that we were having in Kenya, it just seemed appropriate to shift that and move it to that point. So, Howard is also somebody that we respect very much in Africa for his role as a congressman, and during the anti-apartheid days, he was a critical voice and a very important voice. So I always feel very honored to be around him as one of the real Africanists and people who refuse to give up on Africa, no matter what we do and no matter what how hard we try to get people to give up on Africa, because a lot of it is now us. Now, so it's also good to see old friends here and some new friends that I've made in the last few months and years. My old friend Muiza has just walked in, and Muiza is an institution for any African who's lived in Washington. If you don't know Muiza Muntali, then you really don't live in Washington. It's been a feature and an institution here. It's good to see you, Muiza. Now, I'll try and be as short as I can, and essentially, when I was thinking through this whole idea of looking at the Obama machine and Obama himself, it was a number of things were going through my head and our minds. Then is why who is clearly one of the things that's hit us all, and those of us who have worked around Africa, all accept there's a huge leadership crisis in Africa, a massive one. That is, and it just seems that we're not able to cut through that. And after 40, 50 years of independence, you almost can count on one hand, or maybe one and a half hands, the real leaders of Africa, the real sincere leaders of integrity that have existed in Africa. And there's a question keeps emerging: why do we fail? What happens? It's not because of lack of trying. It's not because of lack of capacity or good people. But somehow, when we look at the politics, we seem to attract the West of the West. And so, to some extent, a lot of us who've been thinking about these things have begun thinking maybe it's the way we do politics that is the problem. So when then the Obama machine comes up and he's talking about he wants to change politics, how America's done politics, and so we all thought maybe there's something that we can learn from here and see whether it can be used. Now, to a large extent, again, many of us who've been involved in the pro-democracy movements in Africa have focused a lot of our attention at the top-down approach. We want to change policy, we want to change laws, we want to change constitutions, we want to change structures and systems, and that's fine, and I think that's a good approach. But we seem to have forgotten at some point the role that individuals and people play. And it's really in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years that a lot of the pro-democracy movement in Africa is coming to the point now where we are recognizing that the people themselves are as important as the structures and systems. That you really can't build the structures and systems without the people to do so. The people have to be willing to do so. And the Kenya's experience around constitutional reform is very telling, where you've done a lot of work to mobilize people, to mobilize the country to accept that constitutional reform was necessary, it was going to move. But at the point of truth, when it now comes to crossing that river, if you wish, crossing that bridge, you're not able to, because the leadership that exists does not want a new constitution, does not want a new system of working. So, in a sense, if you don't bring these two together, the right people focused on the institutions, we can't move forward. So, of course, you can't run a society based upon the individual and personalities. Again, that's what we had in Africa after independence. We had all these personality cults, and they had their own issues. So you've got to move the two simultaneously, finding the right people and moving and pushing for institutions. So this is why then the Obama phenomenon becomes important, and for us again, who's this? Obama just came up from nowhere, and within literally a year after he declared in February 2007, he was after the caucuses in Iowa, he was a front runner, and this guy is a non-entity. His resume is really thin. I mean, I actually agree with Arizona State University. He hasn't got a body of work to merit some of these things. It's very thin, but he's got something else that clearly is resonating with people. He's able to organize well. He's able to articulate well. He's able to draw people towards him, and he's able to give hope, which is phenomenal. So it really is, this rank outsider who, as he likes to describe himself, the skinny boy, with the big ears, coming out and galvanizing not just America but the entire world. So it's a phenomenon. So is there something like that that we can do in Africa? Is there a way that we can be able to mobilize people to get the level of hope and enthusiasm that he provided in this country? So this is, and of course for us in Kenya, we claim Barack Obama. We actually now begin to call him Kenya's most important export. Since we can't choose a Barack Obama in Kenya, we'd rather export him to America and hope. And I think the first 100 days have been quite good if you look at it by all intents and purposes. So there's all that. So this is where now we came through. So when I came, I began looking around at the Obama campaign, reading a lot about it. One of the hardest things for me and for everybody else was access. Especially, it's a tight run organization. I'm a foreigner. I don't vote. So there's no need for them to care about me. But I was lucky, and I used as many strings as I could. We talked with Howard. Howard is calling his people, and I finally managed to get access into Florida. And it was a great state to get access into. And I managed to talk to the state director of the Florida campaign. I spent quite a lot of time in Florida, in Tampa, working and moving with the guys there, and finding out how they're doing it. And it's interesting. I mean, a lot of people, when they look at the Obama campaign, the focus is on the new ways he did his campaigning, the internet, the oratory powers and skills he's got. But there's some things there that Obama has that I think we often forget. One is that I don't think I've ever seen a political organization as well organized as this one. It was really well organized. Sufficiently organized that people on the ground have space, but it's limited space. And there was only so much they could do without coming back. So it's a tight ship, but it also was a ship that gave people room to think, to create, to innovate according to the circumstances. And he ran it. I mean, after he lost the New Hampshire, the primary in New Hampshire, he began a system where every day or every other day he talked to all the state directors on conference call every day, just to get what's happening. He took a much stronger control of the political machine than he had before, and I think that helped as they went through. And it was interesting just the way the structures were, so that the state director has a lot of say. And I found it fascinating that even the way one of the things that I found interesting about it is that there was a lot of training for it. People didn't just join the Obama campaign without being trained. Very few, maybe those who had experience before, but even then they went through a process of, in the old days, in the 60s, we'd call it indoctrination. And you had to go through political re-education, even been in the John Kerry campaign or in the Al Gore campaign, to be able to understand this is different. But there was a lot of political education, a lot of political organizing work. I came across a phenomenon I hadn't heard before, which was called Camp Obama, which was training young people to be able to organize. And they had a structure that you almost had, first of all, to be a volunteer before you ever came on staff. And so this whole creation of it was a really well-organized structure. And the other bit of it that is phenomenal, it's common, but it's phenomenal, was how many people who worked on that campaign, the draw of the people. It was that door-to-door canvassing, the phone calls, the phone banks, that made a hell of a difference. And to get to them, he used the internet. To get to them, he used his speeches. To get to those people to do it, he used the rallies. And the way it was done, when you came to a rally, you're always given a sheet of paper. You wrote your address, your email, your telephone, and they're calling upon you. So the whole idea was keep building this army of volunteers and people that they could call upon. Naturally, the giving, the campaign, and spreading it out, of course, helped, because once you paid $50, $100 to the campaign, you got stakes into it. It mattered now. So it was not even so much the money. It was the fact that now you have a stake in it and you need him to win, so your money doesn't get lost. So people now began caring about it. So that I found fascinating. Clearly, the last thing that I found interesting, which is probably the hardest part for me, is the man. I mean, Barack Obama himself is different. I mean, there's no way we can run away from that fact. As he said, he will do the next 100 days in 72. And on the 73rd day he shall rest, which is not far from the truth. I mean, this kind of people come once in a lifetime. The Nelson Mandelas, the Mahatma Gandhis, they come once in a lifetime, who are just, as we say in Kenya, touched by the hand of God, because there's no way to explain them and what they are. And he is a guy who, his personality is an important part, not only because he's cool and calm, but because he's not greedy. He's not a greedy man. He doesn't need to be the president. And talking to people around him during the campaigns towards the end, they kept saying, if he loses this thing, he'll just go back, finish his term as senator, retire, and go into law firm and make a lot of money. He would like to win because he thinks he's got a lot to offer to the United States, but it's not the end of the world if he loses. And I think having gone through his loss in 2000 to Bobby Rush, that was a moment of truth for him to figure out what does he want, who is he, and that I think carries a lot. And that fact that he doesn't need the presidency to be somebody makes a hell of a difference. And I think leadership, if you have less of a need to be a political leader, you have less of a need for power, if you're satisfied in who you are, you're comfortable in your own skin, it makes a big difference into how people react to you and respond to you, because they feel you're not, life will go on. It won't be the end of the world. So, but that's the hardest part for us in terms of now replication, because there's no Obama in Kenya, because we gave him away, but so it's a pity. But and that's, I think, in most of Africa we don't have the Obamas. Maybe there have been people who could have been like Obama, the Sankaras, the Patrice Lumumbas, if they'd had enough chance to be exposed and be seen. But we don't have that, so we've got to find a way now, in a sense, to marry the different aspects of Obama that are important. So for Africa, what do we get? The first bit of it is that I think Africa is changing, and the African people are moving forward. Our leadership is behind, generally speaking. They're behind the people, which is one of the most amazing things in this whole thing, is that the people are ready for a drastic change. They're tired of dictators. They're tired of poverty. They're tired of disease. They're tired of all these things that conflict us. But there seems to be, at least in Kenya, there seems to be a disconnect between what people articulate and the frustrations that they articulate very well, and then how they vote and how they then take action. There's that gap, that space that seems to have been taken over by the political class and manipulated to personal political influence, personal political interests. That's the space that we need to be working on as civil society. And that's a space to try and work with the communities at local level to, in a sense, empower people to feel they can take control of their lives, that the form of politics we've been doing is not helpful to us, nor helpful to the people themselves. The whole culture of ethnic patronage and ethnic interest in voting ethnically as though that's the only identity we have and the rest don't count is something we have to destroy. We'll have to work at. Now, it's something that can be done, and I think it's something that we have to keep doing. And for those of us who are in the pro-democracy movement, I think, for me, this whole thing is a calling for us to spend a lot more time than we have done at the grassroots level with ordinary people than we have done. And we've got to start moving a lot away from the center, moving a lot away from policy change, moving a lot away from the international agenda and international audiences we've been used to, and working at a very, very low, very direct level. That can happen. Clearly, of course, one of the things again we learn is timing, and one of Obama's pieces that's been incredible is his timing. He recognized before anybody else that America had changed. That America was ready. Maybe the 8 years of Bush had made people even more anxious and more ready, but within the Democratic Party, which is where his biggest struggle was going to be in his mind, he recognized the party had changed, and people were younger, they wanted to be active, they wanted to do things, and that is what he tapped into. So it's that approach where we've got to get people ready and understand when they're ready. So this timing issue is so critical. It's a real critical part, and I don't think there's any science to understand. And Howard, as a politician, could tell us, when people recognize when is the timing right for me to go in, to get out. Those whole things are very important. But his timing is impeccable. But also his luck. I mean, he is a lucky guy in so many ways, and I think we've got to accept that. Of course, luck follows those who are lucky and those who work hard for it. And I keep remembering in my mind that when he went to Iraq in the summer, and he was meeting the soldiers, American soldiers in Iraq, and he went to the basketball court and shot this three-point shot that went in. Of all things, it could have missed. It could have missed, but it went in. That is not. It went in. Those are things keep the luck of the draw, and it's a lucky thing. But I keep imagining in my mind, what do people have said if he had missed? And he took 5 shots to get it in. Oops, is this going to be the 5th time lucky? His first attempt at the presidency from outside the box, and he wins it. He nails it. So it's something that's there. The other lesson for us is internet. I mean, internet is particularly special in America because you're so wired. We are not as wired. Hopefully now, as we get the digital lines coming in, the fiber optic lines, we'll see a lot more of it. The laptops and computers are getting cheaper and cheaper. Access will be cheaper. But what we have now has been a blossoming of television and radio in Africa, which we're not using as well as we should. A lot of it is entertainment. We all follow American Idol. I can tell you about Chris Alexander, whoever and all those people, because it comes onto our television screens. But we're not moving to the point where we're using television in a better way, in a sense, as a alternative to internet, to get to people, to start empowering people. And there's a lot of material out there. So we've been doing experiments in the last few months where we take DVDs and tapes of the Orange Revolution in Ukraine and take them to a village and put a television, connect it to the battery of a car, and call people to watch. And it's absolutely amazing, the response. It's absolutely amazing. People want more and more of that. So we're now going to be collecting a lot of that stuff, and the civil rights movement, the Mahatma Gandhi struggles, and just use that. But we also need to do our own documentaries, and it's something that I actually, part of the fellowship that I did was make a documentary around Obama for Kenyan television, but also a little bit was shown in UK television. And it was just finding out, in the footsteps of Obama, trying to find out who this guy was. But it had such resonance being shown in Kenya, and it was interesting because you had to get, one of the difficult things that we had to get a shot of Obama and myself, and that was, you couldn't get a meeting with Obama, so you had to engineer it. And so we engineered it in a rally, and we went to a few rallies. We saw how he operates, how he comes in. So we said, okay, when he comes out, he comes down here. So I stood somewhere where I knew he had to shake my hand, and thank God he remembered me. So he said, "Hey, Maina, how you doing?" And that's how the film ends. Hey, he knows me. Oh! It's good. It was important, but that helps. And through that, we've done a second documentary, which is now on leadership in Kenya, and what it means and where we can go, what kind of leadership we've got. And we have a series planned for the next 2 years around Kenya, but also Africa, just going to Rwanda, finding out the justice system, begin linking Africa more and showing more that, look, we're not alone in our struggles, but there is hope, and we've got to find that hope and push it on. And using documentaries as a rallying point to talk to people. Because anytime you have a television screen in the villages, you'll get at least 200 people coming to watch, and then you have a talk with them after that. So you actually can empower and mobilize people. You're using TV and radio as we go. And then the third thing we learn is the need for us to challenge. We've got to keep challenging as Africans, and in Kenya's case, the ethnic issue has to be challenged directly. So it's very interesting now. In the last 6 months, we've had young people under the age of 40 forming these groups of that are meant to challenge the ethnic group. So they're calling, for example, there's one called Kikuyus for Change. And the young Kikuyu men and women who are in business, who are in professionals, who are beginning a process of let us think for ourselves. We have been led and directed by this ethnic chiefs who tell us what to do and how we're going to vote. We've got to challenge them. It's happening among the Kalenjin, among the Luo, among the Kamba, among the Luya. And slowly we're bringing them together. In fact, as soon as I get back, we're doing a workshop with all these groups where we will now start asking, showing that the way we vote and the way we go around being divided because of one identity we have is not in our interests. It's in the interests of a few old, rich men who become wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. So there's stuff there where we begin challenging the machinery as it is. Third, the other thing we learn which can be replicated is the need to keep providing hope. And the hope message in a realistic sense is critical. Once we lose that hope, we have nothing left. And I think for us it's something we've got to giving that sense. And because we have no Obamas left in the world, what we can get is a multiplicity of people who can perhaps replicate and express Obama, diversity, age, gender, and everything else. People who are committed, and people can say, hey, this is a bunch of 15 or 16 people who make sense collectively. And it's going back to communism a bit, but which is the people in control. I forgot the name now, but it sounds a bit like that. But it really has to. We have to take some of those things as we're going on. So. The last thing we have, one of the challenges in terms of replicating Obama, if we're ever going to go there, is that we have to start working on training people on non-violent civic action. We have given that up. We have not done that, and so whenever protests happen, whenever people are frustrated, they show that, they express that often in an anarchic way or in a violent way, and they burn buildings, they burn vehicles, and we've got to be able to start training people to start thinking about how to do that. This doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come. People aren't born with that. When you're angry, often the first impulse is to go for my oppressor, and you've got to be able to channel them to show that it doesn't have to be that. So there's a lot of work to be done in that sense. Now, our goal as the Movement for Political Accountability is yes, to keep political accountability, but I think over the last few months we have changed it as well to now saying we want to change how politics is done in Kenya, and that's what we're going to work at, but getting the people themselves to move away and let them lead. So we are looking at getting the ordinary Kenyans to feel empowered to tackle their local problems, but put their local problems to the national stage. So it's no longer in the slums that you've got no toilets, therefore you complain there. No. Let's take it to the national level so the entire country can know you have no toilets and no water in the slums. Then we can address them. In fact, one of the slogans we're coming up with is public solutions to public problems, because we've been having private solutions to public problems. Because our schools are so bad, we just pull our kids out of public schools, send them to private schools. The hospitals are so bad, we don't go to them anymore, we go to private hospitals. So there's a part there where we have to start rethinking and rejigging a lot of the way we think and as it goes. Anyway, so one of the questions asked is whether there's a role for US-style campaigning. Now, clearly the world has moved. I think even in the UK, at least with Tony Blair, there was US-style campaigns, not to the extent as it happens here because it's a parliamentary system. But for us in Kenya, because of a quasi-presidential system, there always has been US style. The candidates going around and having rallies and they even have websites, although they don't update them very often. But they have all these things going on. So that's not a real issue. And I think it's going to be hard for us in Kenya to move entirely away from a presidential system because we've gotten used to it. We've gotten used to a direct vote for the presidency. But there's got to be a moderation in terms of where it goes. Some people are talking about the French approach of duality between a prime minister and a president. But that's still out to be seen. But I think that it's the whole idea of the media, the whole idea of is going to be used a lot, the campaigning, the personal role. But we want to move a little bit away from individuals because we don't have an individual who can move it. So in a sense, when you ask me whether the Obama machine can be replicated in Kenya and Africa, I think the answer is yes, but it won't happen soon. I think we're looking 7-8 years down the line. There's a lot of work for us to do in between that period to build up the people to be ready. But in the meantime, in fact, probably the most urgent thing for at least in Kenya, and one of the messages I hope to leave with you, and Howard, who's just come from Kenya with Steve, will tell you that Kenya is on the precipice. We are really again on the road towards conflict. There's little doubt about that. And if things go on as they are going, it'll be way worse than last year. It'll be way worse. And a lot of that is because our political class doesn't seem to have felt the crisis the same way as we did. And they're going on as business as usual. It's all about making money. In fact, we now began to call it's called the Grand Coalition Government. We're now calling it the Grand Corruption Government because corruption has definitely increased dramatically as everybody starts to stock up for the next election. And there's little hope, and within the level of the ratings in the polls are really very low for the coalition government. People have lost hope in it because they're not delivering and because they're interested in power. And the best part of it, I think, for me in terms of the coalition is that they've proven to us that there's no alternative between the two. That really ODM and PNU is exactly the same thing. Just a bit of the letters changed. And as Michaela Wrong's book says, it's our turn to eat. Whoever gets there, it's our turn to eat. And that's really what's important. Eating. So it's something that I think the Kenyans have seen and are beginning to and are accepting. And I think the frustrations that are there are very real if you travel, especially outside Nairobi. In fact, one of the things, even in Nairobi, every single week for the last 3 months, every week, there's been a protest in Nairobi, whether it's hawkers, it's recyclers, it is students, it is teachers. Every week for the last 3 months, there's a huge disturbance in Nairobi. And that's been consistent. And we haven't yet begun connecting these dots and figuring out, hey, what are these things telling us? But it's every week that happens. So there is a lot of discontent, and that hope that we had in 2002 especially has gone. And there's still a lot of work to be done in understanding Obama and his administration as it goes. But I think we'll keep an eye on it. And I'm particularly interested in seeing how that machine transforms itself afterwards. And one of the things that worried me a bit around it was the entire personality cult that the Obama campaign was having. It was really about him as a personality. He was drawing people. How do you emerge and move away from that? And for me, and I'm sure for the Muizas of this world, personality cults are just dangerous. We just remember Banda, we remember Kenyatta, we remember Moi, we remember Mobutu, and we don't like personality cults, even if it's a good personality. It's something we don't want. Personality cults are just dangerous and have hurt us so much. So it's something I would like to see as I'll be studying to see what happens to the Obama personality as we go. Let me finish there, and so we can have a bit of dialogue. And I hope I've put enough of you to sleep that it'll be a bit quiet.
Great. Thank you so much, Maina. That's kind of a fascinating account. There's one element of the let me make a couple of observations to get the discussion going. There was one element of Obama's biography that you didn't mention, except that, which was his community organizing piece. Yes. And in fact, I think he would say that much of what he learned about how to move people, about how to inspire people, came out of that experience as a community organizer. And in terms of your description of what you're attempting to do now in Kenya, that's really what community organizing is all about. I just wanted to make that one connection. The other is, this question, you mentioned it, but I think it's sometimes not understood well in the United States. And that is, I mean, sometimes Africa is seen as something sui generis, something unique. And we have a lot of terminology. Tribalism is the one. Now, actually, when Africans use the word tribalism, it has very different connotations than when Americans use the word tribalism. But the implication is that tribalism causes conflict, or that ethnicity causes conflict. I want to suggest that it's more complicated than that. That indeed, as you said, ethnicity is manipulated by politicians everywhere in the world. And that has been true in the United States as much as it has been in Africa. And that the challenge in Africa, the reason ethnicity seems to be a more serious problem in Africa than, say, in the United States or Western Europe, where ethnicity is still manipulated by politicians, is that because of the colonial history and the imposition of national boundaries and institutions, there is not the same sense of nationhood among most African countries. That is, the national identities are so fragile, they're very tenuous. And in that circumstance, where people do not see each other as equal parts of the nation, in which you've not had, in which people are operating kind of a zero-sum paradigm, winner takes all, in which one person's success or victory can only come at the expense of the other guy, where there's no, where the relationships among key leaders is very tenuous and very, has been fractured. And where the way people talk to each other is very, very volatile and confrontational. In the African context, because of the fragility of national institutions and boundaries, that phenomenon I'm describing, which is a universal phenomenon, has much more potent implications. It's much more destabilizing, much more threatening to the state than in societies where you have the kinds of understandings that exist and make a combination, or the identity of a combination. One of the things I find absolutely fascinating is that because the Western world doesn't get it, we have this remarkable fixation on elections and on competition as the essence of democracy. And so all the pro-democracy programs at USAID and NED, where I happen to be on the board until recently, are directed at strengthening competitive capacities, whether it's advocacy of this or that, whether it's multipartyism, and so on. When the challenge in Africa is not building more competitive capacity, it's building more collaborative capacity. It's getting in place those agreements that exist in a stable democratic society, which don't exist in the African context, or seldom exist in the African context. Let me just throw that out for, and we'll take a couple of questions, and you can respond to a few things at once. Right over here.
Thank you, Howard.
We're going to have them. Do we need a? Oh, it's being webcast, so we'd like you to have the microphone. Thank you.
Brian Murphy. Speaking for myself, Mina, I had the great pleasure of meeting you between 1995 and 97 in Kenya. Thank you for all you've done. You've presented a most cogent picture of the interest, certainly in Kenya, of President Obama and his methods and such. What about the other way around? What about President Obama? How interested is he in Africa? I believe Johnny Carson will be the nominee as Assistant Secretary of State for Africa. But what about President Obama himself in Africa, please?
Okay. Microphone here.
Hi, Mina. Thank you very much for a very thought-provoking presentation. And like Howard, I'm not going to ask a question. I'm going to make a comment because you've made me a little nostalgic in a sense as you spoke about leadership in Africa. I was in South Africa for many years in the 70s, and I was a very close friend of Steve Biko. And as you talked about the lack of leadership and by that I think you're talking about leaders who are peacemakers, who see beyond the divisions, whether ethnic or regional or whatever. And it's always struck me in my 40 years of being in Africa that those seem to be the people that we lose so quickly: the Tom Mboyas, the Eduardo Monlans, the Amilcar Cabrals, the Patrice Lumumbas, the Steve Bikos, and et cetera. And I recall very vividly Biko, both privately and publicly, always, although he was representing what was called the Black Consciousness Movement in South Africa, was the starter of the Black Consciousness movement in South Africa, along with Mampilo Rampelli, always talked about whites being as much victims of apartheid as were blacks, and how they were destroying their own souls, and et cetera. So he saw beyond those divisions. I, of course, see Obama very much in that line. And so the nostalgia is just regretting that we don't see more leaders of this ilk emerging. But obviously, the answer partly to the reason they don't is they are seen as great threats by the state, whether it be a minority-ruled state as it was in South Africa during Biko's time, or whether it's authorities in Portuguese minority-ruled areas like with Cabral and Mondelán, or whatever happened with Lumumba, we'll never know quite for sure. And in Boya, the state is very threatened by the peacemakers, and that's just my comment.
And way in the back. Yeah, right back there.
Thank you for being here. I have a question about the coalition.
What's your name?
Kehinde Togan with the National Democratic Institute. So you were talking about the growing dissent between the Kenyan population, but it seems like the ODM and PNU both have a vested interest to stay in power. So given that, I'm wondering how long you think the coalition is going to last, and how prepared are the Kenyan institutions as well as the Kenyan people for new elections if they were to happen?
Why don't we take those questions first, and we'll take the second round in a second.
Just, I completely agree with you, Howard, about the community organizer aspect. I think that's really is the key, and I think that's where a lot of us are going to, and I think a lot of us are thinking we need to have these skills, and we have been operating and organizing at a different level, and we've got to be able to bridge that gap and do community organizing. I mean, that's really is but it's not, you know, it's not easy. It's not easy, particularly in closed or relatively closed societies, where you have a fear of the police breaking up your meetings or breaking up stuff. But even now, us, at least in Kenya, is a threat to our lives. And if they may not, even if they do, may not assassinate someone like me, people you work with may be at risk. And if one of your close associates dies, you know, you're completely finished. So there's an issue there around how we work on these issues, particularly with the threats of extrajudicial executions. The ethnic. Let me take the question around, of how long the coalition will last. I think the coalition is going to last as long until they have enough money on both sides to stand for an election, to contest election. I think that's the key. Do Kenyans want elections? I think when the churches made a call for new elections early because we can't stand the coalition, it was received quite well. We can't handle an election right now. Absolutely. I mean, we don't, even if we have an electoral commission, I don't think any of us would want that electoral commission to handle elections. We probably have to ask the UN to come and do it, the UN Electoral Assistance Division to run our elections for us. You know, I think we are at a point where we clearly are a failing state, and it shows. And I think there's not much. There are only a few people deny that. So the coalition will last. I mean, as long, but see what happens is that the more they fight, the more the tensions rise ethnically, because politics has been organized ethnically. So the longer they continue, then the higher the tension. So you almost want them to break up immediately, so that at least we don't before it becomes way too tense and out of control. So it's not working. It's not working well on that, and that's where the ethnic issue, you know, and this leads me to the ethnic issue, the national identity, national identity. We are all made up of different identities. And one of the things that I keep asking myself, I mean, I don't think you find any people more religious than Africans. There are more churches around the corner in Lagos than I've seen anywhere in the world. Not anywhere in the world. There are more mosques on the coast of Kenya than you've ever seen anywhere in the world. We go to church and mosque every day. You know, I've got friends who are Muslims, and on the hour they have to go and pray. And then they go and steal after that. And people go to church, then they go and steal after that. So there's a lot of religiosity in our societies. And we are very happy to say we are Christians, or we are Muslims, or we are whatever it is. But that identity doesn't seem to have gotten into us. It just seems to be a very peripheral, top-level identity. So in the absence of ideology, in the absence of, at least in Kenya, and I'm sure every other part of Africa, if you look at the manifestos of the political parties, they are virtually identical. In fact, the ones in Kenya always make me laugh. I mean, it's you can bet is one consultant has written them all and just changing the name of the party where it suits him, but exactly the same. So when there's no difference in what you're standing for and looking for, then the way to divide people in competitive politics is through ethnicity. So we have these coalitions that are ethnic coalitions that we call parties more than anything else. And that again it's part of the whole idea of elections. I think that has hurt us because we have not done the work in between elections to strengthen the institutions. And that's where we've been put a lot of work before in the 90s and early 2000s. Put a lot of work in trying to get a new constitution, new institutions. I know, for example, DFID in Britain has put a lot of money into police reform, and nothing has changed. So it's again the same thing. How do you create those institutions, Howard, around so that we can have the democracy beyond elections? And so it's a lot. There's a lot of work. But again, if we can find a way to begin collaborating and making ethnicity less important, then I think we'll be spot on. Does Obama care for Africa? Absolutely. I mean, I think if you when you read his autobiography, he talks about having read Chinua Achebe and Wole Soyinka. I mean, I think this is the first American president who even knows the name Chinua Achebe. So he does. He's done his reading. When we were at law school together with him, he spent a lot of time asking questions. He has read Tom Mboya. He spent a lot of time being an Africanist, and I'm in close touch with some people at the National Security Council who see him on a regular basis, and he keeps asking about Africa, and he doesn't want it. I mean, particularly in Kenya, where he's got relatives, and he doesn't want it to burn. And so the question is, what can he do? And the question they're asking around there is, where does he use his capital? So when Johnny Carson was there this week, he delivered a very strong message to the government.
And he already is Assistant Secretary. Yeah.
He issued a very, very strong note to them about getting the act together. I mean, I think the whole Kenya is special to that extent that conflict in Kenya makes the whole sub-region useless. As we saw in over last year, Uganda is in. I mean, and right now, in fact, one of the things that is worrying us around the sub-region is how tenuous we are. And I was telling somebody the other day that we seem to have taken over in that sub-region the role of West Africa in the 90s, where in West Africa, the 90s, every country was on the verge of collapse, from Nigeria to Sierra Leone to Liberia to Ivory Coast to everywhere. Togo had the Adema was refusing to budge. It just seems that has now moved to East Africa and the Horn, from Somalia to Ethiopia. Eritrea, as we know, is in a crisis. Somaliland, which we thought was moving well, has now can't even hold elections because they don't want to lose power. Uganda has elections in 2011 that Museveni will likely steal, and have to steal a lot more than he did before. You have South Sudan is having a conflict. They're now arming seriously. This next conflict in Sudan will not be with AK-47s; it's with tanks. We saw the ship that was hijacked on the seas. It was all the Ukrainian tanks and ammunition and armaments is for South Sudan. This was the third shipment that's been going on with the acceptance of both Kenya and Uganda. We have got Rwanda, and in its all, where we always pray for the life of Paul Kagame, because you don't know what will happen if he dies. You have Burundi with its confusion, and Kenya is also we're teetering over. So that region is very dangerous, and I'm not sure whether we know how to handle it. And in fact, one of the messages again we have got to keep asking is, can we prevent this region from becoming the West Africa of the 90s in some form? But I think that's the next sphere of action. Southern Africa seems to have got it right. So apart from Swaziland and Zimbabwe, and though Zimbabwe is going to be a crisis until Mugabe decides that he's now too old. It's actually very scary within the sub-region. But I think this is obvious. I mean, I think again with the war on terror and the issues of with Somalia and the linkages to the Indian Ocean and the seas, and it's an issue that is going to disturb us for a while. And America has real interest in making sure that region is stable, really, but not stable like it used to be in the Cold War, which is one of the things we have to be careful about. We don't want stability the Cold War style, which is what was happening in the Bush administration, where as long as you're an ally in the war on terror, you could do whatever you wanted, which is where Ethiopia got away with stealing elections. Kibaki almost got away with stealing elections. As long as you're on the right side, you can do it, which is why Obasanjo got away with it in Nigeria for stealing elections. The war on terror was the old Cold War, and we know that Obama will not do the same thing.
Okay, let's take another round. beginning here and then.
Yeah,
middle
my
and
name
over
is
there.
Ashad. I'm from Uganda, and I'm at George Mason University. I'm studying power sharing and inter-ethnic cooperation. So you know what it's all about. I have two comments that, and I want you to get your opinion. You seem to share and hold an opinion with Mamdani in his book Citizen and Subject. His central argument is de-emphasize ethnicity, destruction of tribalism for democracy to take root in Africa, in post-colonial states. Supposing we thought otherwise and said, let's recognize the ethnicity, because ethnicity is a central defining feature of an African person. Supposing you gave it more recognition so that even those who try to use it to manipulate find less ground to manipulate, because everybody is recognized. Supposing instead of destruction, instead of de-emphasizing, we recognized it. Okay? I would want to get your comment on that. The second comment is that Obama, the president of Kenya, went into parliament in 1963. Obama was 2 years old. For all that time he has been there, now he's the president. You can see a generation gap within which we can explain a lot of things, including the fact that Kibaki's mentality, as is Museveni, as is Mugabe's, is rooted into the pre-colonial mentality of servant and master and so on. That is carried forward. It is the central problem all over there, all those disputes that are there. And so is Raila Odinga on the opposition.
His government.
Pardon?
He's in government, don't forget.
He's in government, yes, but I mean that is his background in any case. So my view, my question is that recognizing that gap, what efforts are on the ground, because I know that you are doing community work and educating people to try and transform them. But the people that hold these institutions at the bottom, at the top, the structures of power and governance are still the same. I'm trying to understand what mechanisms you are employing, not only to educate people and, telling them that, look at things differently, but to also engage those structures that they have put into place so that they are not as divisive as they are when the time comes, probably. That you don't only transform the minds of the people in the villages, but even the structures themselves, knowing that structure and agency are completely different things. Thank you.
Thank you. Then in the middle there. Yeah, no, right here. This gentleman.
Hey, Gerald Lamel from Africa Action. We had the privilege of working with you when I was a DED at Amnesty International. My question is, given that we've seen Africa deprioritized by the U.S. government so often, does it concern you that the Africa team is now only just beginning to come together after, the Secretary of State has been on at least 3 international trips?
Greg Simpkins with the Leon Sullivan Foundation. I did some political work in Kenya in the mid-'90s with political parties and also on elections, and I had the opportunity to meet a lot of young, dynamic people who founded the original FORD, the Forum for the Restoration of Democracy, and the Democratic Party from which Kibaki came. But the formation of all of these different coalitions that we see now seems to have diluted all of these people. Can you tell us, where are they, these young reformers, and is there a chance that they could reconstitute somebody like some group like the original FORD or the original Democratic Party?
Thank you. And let's take this last question on this round right here.
Hi, Minor. Muiza Mtali, Trans-Africa Forum. I noticed in your mentioning of the sub-region East Africa, you forgot one country, Tanzania, which has a very good example, and if you could expand on why Tanzania is a good example of which is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, but very peaceful democratically, and the leadership in your area. And people often forget that as an example of how to govern well and democracy. And as we're looking for solutions, we have some answers on the continent and leadership in the past, and if you can expand on Tanzania's role as well in the region.
Good. Want to take those?
Thank you very much, Muiza. You notice I did not mention Tanzania as a hotspot, because deliberately it is not, and I think it's one of the few countries that's had a good leader. And I started off saying that Africa's had a really very few leaders. I think we have to put Nyerere as one of the great African leaders in many ways. Even though his economic policies failed, he had integrity, and he was a national leader. And I think it's a pity that that's not recognized sufficiently. But I think that's really so that once the leadership has a national vision, I think it changes the way it goes. And I think that actually links a little bit to what you're asking about ethnicity, because what Nyerere did was de-emphasize ethnicity, and one of the things he did was make a directive that for secondary school, you had to leave your home area and go to somewhere else. So the country spread out. So if you're born in Dar es Salaam, you went to school in the West, and you had to do that for high school. So that makes you then begin meeting people. So there's a lot of boarding schools in Tanzania. And once we begin understanding that people are human beings, that begins reducing ethnicity as the sole motivator for who you are. And I think that's the part for me that is where I think is difficult in terms of your suggestion. And that's what they're trying to do in Burundi, is accept ethnicity as a reality. And Howard will talk a little bit more about that. But in Burundi's agenda is say, ethnicity is a reality. We're going to deal with it. We're going to have quotas in determining the military, in determining government, in determining other things. The jury is still out whether that's going to work or not, having the quota system, and we will see. But where we have seen success is Tanzania, where that de-emphasized entirely ethnicity. They came up with a national language that everybody speaks, able to communicate, and they deliberately went and built a nation. So Tanzanians are Tanzanians, and this is where Howard had been talking about national identity. Nationhood doesn't come accidentally. It's got to be constructed. And even this country, the United States, is a construction. It's a very systematic construction. And including blowing up myths of the Mayflower and how people came in and running in, is all deliberately constructed. When you ask French why they are French, they will tell you about liberté, fraternité. So all these things are built in consciously by the state to build a sense of nationhood. If you ask a Frenchman or a Frenchwoman, what is it about being French? They'll tell you. If you ask a Ugandan, they'll tell you, well, I'm a Baganda and this is what I did. So we don't have a sense of our nation. Yet even though ethnicity is so important to us, you look at this furore we're having with Uganda about that little island on the lake called Migingo, the one acre plot of rock, bare rock. We want it as our own, because for some reason we have accepted their borders that are ours. So we have accepted the concept of the state physically, but we've not accepted the concept of the state in terms of personality and who we are at a political, sociological level. So we can't have it both ways. I mean, if we want then to go, in my view, because our ethnic groups, unlike in Rwanda and Burundi, have got their own original areas. So if we're going to do that, and Rwanda, Burundi, they're spread around, they are mixed up all over. But Baganda we know where the Baganda are. We know where the Toro people are. We know where the Banyankoles are. So if we're going to start saying this is central to defining the state, then we basically just carve out as kingdoms. And maybe that's where we need to go. Just have, 500 small states, small countries in Uganda, or whatever the ethnic groups are. But we can't have it both ways, in a sense, because of the way the ethnic groups in some of these larger countries are structured. So if we want to have a nation, then we have to de-emphasize the ethnic issue and be able to build up a national ethos that makes us understand it doesn't really matter who you where you're from, what your culture is, because you're not that different in cultural terms. It's really the sharing of the national pie that becomes important. It's the rise of ethnicity has been with resources. We have limited resources. You get in, it's for me and my people only. The rest you can have your turn. When your turn comes, you can eat. And so we start eating. So part of it as well is the eating culture. If we can get away from that corruption, eating, it's mine, the state is mine. If we can move away from that, you will see a de-emphasizing of the state, of ethnicity. But ethnicity now is a mobilizing tool for corruption and for power. And until we deal with that, we will not be able to move on. And how to get people to let go? Howard will probably tell you what they're doing in Burundi and Congo in terms of getting at the institution level those old guards to start letting go in structures and systems. But I think some part of it is that we don't put enough pressure on them. Part of the reasons why they don't let go. In many societies, at least in Kenya, for example, among the Kikuyu community, generational change was never given. It was forced. In fact, the word that's used in Kikuyu, Itweka, was a revolution. You overthrew the older generation and they went to rest. They went to pasture, in a sense. And then the new generation took over. And this happened every 20 years or so. There would be Itweka, revolution. So it's never given. And I think one of the things that's happened is that we haven't yet gone to that point. We've done it properly to be able to get there. And I think that comes to the question, Greg, you asked about the Young Turks in the 90s. They're now mostly in their 60s, but so they're no longer Young Turks. It's been a while. But they can't come together. There's too much history in it. And I think the longer they stayed in the opposition, the harder it became for them. And I think people got greedy as well. They got involved in corruption. I think of that team of the so-called Young Turks, I would have a hard time picking out one person who I would say is a reformer still. They talk the talk. They don't walk it. And that's that's a difficult part for me. So I'm happy that they've disintegrated. I don't think that's where the future of Kenya is. I think we'll make a huge mistake if we go back to that, because they've gotten involved in corruption. They've got involved in things that are, in stealing elections at all levels. They're not what we want. They were then in the 90s. I think time has been unkind to them in many ways. But I think the question is still valid. Where are these new reformers who can come and do that? And I think there's a burgeoning group of people that is beginning to emerge. Some from corporate world. Actually, one of the interesting things is that there's now beginning to be dialogue and consultations and talk between the corporate world, the religious sector, civil society, to talk about leadership and how do we get a team going. It's one of the interesting things in Kenya is that there has been a complete renaissance in the corporate world. Complete. The leadership in the corporate world is almost all Kenyan. After from a time when multinationals always had British CEOs, is probably one or two. It's only the mobile phone companies that have got expatriates, but the banks are all run by young Kenyans from all different ethnic groups, and they're doing a fabulous job. The breweries and all the big companies are doing extremely well. There's a whole leadership and a whole new way of doing things in the corporate world that we need to tap into and bring into the political and the reform agenda, which is something that's ongoing in a sense. General, the delay. The State Department, as you know, has been delayed completely in everything. I think it's not just Africa. And I think partly my understanding is really the dynamics between merging the Clinton machine and the Obama machine. And that's going to be problematic because, Hillary doesn't come as Hillary alone. Unlike Guy Gaitner, who comes as on his own and is given people to work with in other departments, Hillary comes with a machine. So I think there must be negotiations going on between her people Obama's people who are doing foreign affairs during the campaign and how to get through. So it's going to happen. I mean, if you noticed, there was no delay in the National Security Council team. This will happen quickly because there's no need to consult with anybody's team. And I think that's moved on. So I mean, one hopes, and I actually think that Johnny Carson was a compromise between the two teams because he wasn't either in Obama or Hillary. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. But that's my reading. But I think that it's everywhere in the State Department. Does it? I mean, clearly Obama is focused now on the domestic agenda, as he should. And if that works out well, I think the leeway he'll have now to do international affairs will be tremendous. Will be tremendous. I mean, I was part of a debate earlier this week about this his trip to Egypt in June, where he's going to be talking to the Muslim world, and actually there's a lot of discontent among the Indonesians and the Senegalese, and who say, Egypt's not the Muslim world, it's the Arabic world. Let's differentiate between this. So he's got to work a little bit more at that speech, and but I think it could be useful. And Egyptians that I've been talking to are completely unhappy that he's going there. But they hope that, so I was saying that, it might just be one of those winds of change speeches that Macmillan gave in South Africa, and maybe an important one, but who knows? I mean, the one thing you can be sure is that Obama knows how to give a speech, and he knows the moments well. So you can almost, and he's not stupid. I mean, this guy will think through. He knows the situation. He will understand it, and he will focus his speech to what he wants to get to. I don't think he's had any really, really nasty, bad speech. All his speeches have been real targeted, and so I'm not as worried about it. Egyptians are really unhappy. But again, if he meets the opposition, that'll make a difference as well in Egypt. So, good. I think.
Let me just make a few comments on these subjects that we've been very involved with together. If you heard me suggest that ethnicity should be suppressed, that I was accepting Mandani's notion. That's not my view. To me, the issue, I think ethnicity, as you point out, is a central part of every human being's identity. And that's, again, in America, we've had ethnic politics from the time of our century, whether it's Irish, Italian, Jewish, black. Ethnic groups have been voting blocs. There's been ethnic voting. Not perfectly, people break and fragment across the parties in some instances. In other instances, the ethnic bloc has been very solid, and you can predict how a given community will vote just by knowing their ethnicity. So I don't think ethnicity is the issue. I think ethnic conflict is a symptom of, which is different than ethnicity. I mean, when you have people that become so focused on the ethnic dimension, it is normally because they don't see, because you have this manipulation that Mina has described of ethnicity for the political benefit of politicians. And so for me, the challenge is not so much to deny ethnicity, is to affirm common ground, to build the kind of relationships, to move from a zero-sum mentality of the world, winner take all, to a recognition that people can be stronger through collaboration with others, which is not to try to deny ethnicity. It's trying to manage ethnicity. It's trying in a constructive way, and then you raise this question about changing at the top, changing folks at the top, or in the structures that exist, rather than simply at the community level. I happen to think if you don't change people at the top, and I think you have to work at the community level. And I think what's being described here is excellent. But if you don't change people at the top, or if you don't change the behavior of people at the top, a single moment can undo all the reconciliation that has occurred locally. We've seen this time and time again. A demagogic politician arises in any country and will undermine the reconciliation activities that have occurred at the local level. So I think you've got to work at all levels. And I think it is doable. I think it is possible. What we've been doing for the last several years in divided societies in Burundi, Congo, Liberia, East Timor, is to target key leaders from all sectors, not just political, civil society and military, and bring those leaders into a training process that is designed to change their definition of their own self-interest. Now, throughout Africa, I've always heard it said that the problem with politicians is they're so self-serving, they never think of the nation. I don't think it's a useful formulation, because in my experience as a politician, this goes back to my 22 years in electoral politics, if people thought there was some kind of tension between the national interest and their personal private interest, I knew what would prevail. So the challenge of political leadership is to try to help people begin to understand their self-interest differently, that they're going to come out ahead rather than behind by beginning to build these mechanisms of collaboration, by changing the paradigms, by building relationships, by building trust. As Mina mentioned, Steve and I have just been in Kenya under a mission that was sponsored by the UN to take a look, do kind of an assessment of the country. And so we spoke to a broad cross-section of Kenyans. We encountered the same thing that we encountered in Burundi, Congo, and Liberia before we began, in which every faction would say two things. Jesus, we need this kind of work at trust building and relationship building and so on. But the other guys won't join in. That's symptomatic of the conflict. We found everyone not happy with the present circumstance. And so I think it is possible to work with top leaders in ways that can build a different kind of culture. If you go into Burundi today, it's stunning. Here you have decades, at least 4 decades, of bitter, polarized political conflict between Tutsi and Hutu. If you go into Burundi today, you find that while there's enormous political confusion at the local level, it is no longer defined in terms of Tutsi versus Hutu. The very act of putting ethnicity on the table, and as Mina pointed out, and dealing with it openly has led to its disappearance as the central factor. I mean, it's been fascinating. And the cohesion. We've worked for years now with the National Command of the Army and the National Command of the Police. And the cohesion they've retained despite the political confusion, which is mainly now intra-Hutu confusion primarily, has been very striking. The other thing I wanted to suggest is, on the business of the lateness of the Africa team coming together, I've been pretty close to this one. And it had much more to do with not even negotiations between the Hillary camp and the Carson camp. In fact, what's been stunning has been their political reconciliation. And it really is. I mean, a very good relationship. It's been much more bureaucratic, vetting, the bureaucracy, the security clearances. One of the reasons the NSC moved rapidly is the NSC doesn't have to be confirmed. And whereas every assistant secretary has to be confirmed. And outside of one other, I think Johnny is the second assistant secretary to be in place. No one's in place there yet. And so it's much more a question of the bureaucracy kind of thing. And then finally, Tanzania is an affirmative model. It is an affirmative model. And yes, Nyerere was extraordinary in his national leadership and insisting upon common language and so on. But also Tanzania had the good fortune of having lots of tiny groups. And so no one group could threaten any other group. It makes it a hell of a lot easier to build coalitions that way and build a sense of national unity. I told an anecdote when I was in Kenya to a group once, which I want to repeat. I was with Kenya. I did a lot of working with Nyerere throughout the Burundi peace process. And I was at his home one day, and we were having a very kind of quiet conversation, just the two of us. And he was in a very reflective mood. And he said, I really take a lot of pride in what I've achieved here in building a nation and bringing all of these disparate groups together to form a common identity. But Howard, I wasn't much of an economist. I'm not sure he was ever quite that explicit publicly. Take another round of questions. Yeah.
Oh, yes. First thing is a better comment. Okay.
The first thing is a little comment on, particularly on the issue of non-violence. It's very ironic that the vast majority of African leaders came to power through the barrel of gun, and they maintain themselves in power through that means. And a place like that, if we can think of resolving conflicts on non-violence means, would be too much wish. And it is our wish. As Oromo, we have been struggling with the Ethiopian government for over 100 years. We have always dreamed of resolving that conflict through negotiation, through non-violence means, and to this date we failed. My question is, going back to the question, how much do you see the share of Ethiopia on destabilization of the Horn of Africa, where turmoil has been part of the region? Somalia is non-existent. The Sudan situation, you know, there is still tension between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is the giant of the Horn. How much did you see its role on destabilizing the whole of the region?
Thank you. And right next to you, right here.
Thank you. My name is Jimmy Muller, and I'm with the Southern Sudanese Voice of Freedom. I just want to thank Howard and all the people who have not given up on Africa. I think that's very important in spite of all what's happening. And for my thank you too for taking up this role. We have many scholars or Africans who have come to school or who are lecturers in institutions, but they have not been able to go beyond that area, like going out and trying to use those skills in trying to promote efforts like what you're doing in this pro-democracy movement. So if you could try to pull some more people of that caliber to help you in that process, I think that definitely would be good. Now, can we replicate, can the bomber machine be replicated in Kenya and in Africa? Of course, this is a very important question and a big question. So many things can be tried in terms of trying to make that happen. But I think one thing is to create that environment where something like that can be nurtured. Unless an environment like that is created, it would be difficult to be able to do that. And I'm just thinking maybe one thing that could be done is to maybe institute a kind of a three-party democratic system, for example. Or I would say a three-party, so that you have that could be something that could be adapted if the African Union or the international community could try to get that. That would be one way to kind of get consensus on how to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Hand right over here.
Thank you for speaking to us today. Brendan Sanders with USAID. Just following up on what was said earlier about examples that can be followed on the African continent. Ghana last year had a very, very tight election, and while it's a mistake to confuse a successful election with wide or good governance, it still does strike me as an important milestone, as tight as that race was, and yet the process held true. I don't think that from what I've seen, there doesn't appear to be an Obama-type figure in Ghana. But I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on whether some of the structures of the Obama campaign, some of the things that, besides just his personality, some of the things that his campaign did that made him successful, were they present in Ghana? And on a wider level, what can Kenya and the rest of the continent learn from the experience that happened there? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take one last question here in this round.
Thank you very much. Nia Kwete. I'm looking at what impact, sort of as the title suggests, Obama might have on Africa. And I'm looking at, in putting together the Africa team here, one of the policy issues below the surface has been whether the president will copy his predecessor in democracy promotion. Mr. Bush talked about it a lot, but he didn't do it that much in Africa. He supported quite a few dictators. And the debate is what Mr. Obama should do. So I'm wondering your take on it. I mean, should he go back to the so-called realist stance of dealing with dictators and putting democracy on the back burner, or should he push Africans to say, you ought to develop your own democracy so that if there is an Obama in your country, a person from a minority group, he can also rise up? And I'd like Mina's take and Howard's take as well.
These are all very interesting, tough questions. The role of Ethiopia, I think Ethiopia and the Horn his role is well known, and I think has interests in keeping people together, in keeping the country together. We know the Eritrea war and stuff. Clearly the fast elections in 2005 had an impact beyond Ethiopia's borders, and I think that this led to the 2007 facade of elections in Nigeria and the mess in Kenya in 2008 and the ones in Zimbabwe in 2009. Because once you are able to get away with it, then and I think that's really the big thing, that because the international community allowed Meles to get away with those elections because he was doing something for them in Somalia, it became a hassle. And I know the next elections, clearly there'll be tense, there'll be issues. I've just been reading about the new NGO law that has just been passed in Ethiopia, which says you can only get 10% of your funding from international, and the rest, 90%, is going to be from your own country. And I was suggesting that they need to go to court and argue the government also needs to have the same rule. Only 10% of its budget should be foreign-based. Otherwise, it's not seen as an Ethiopian government. It really doesn't make sense for a government to be foreign-funded and doesn't want NGOs to be foreign-funded. Anyway, there are many things. Ethiopia is going to be a model or something to some country to watch out on, because it's clearly there's so many dynamic issues. I am not convinced that the best way to deal with a government that comes in through the barrel of the gun is through the gun as well. My sense has been that once you get that cycle going, it doesn't stop and becomes much too painful for everybody else. I think we have got to change, perhaps, when I talk about non-violent action, I think we have to do a lot more work ourselves, because if you have 200,000 people marching on a street, there's no army that can stop you. They're scared as well. They're scared. So the more people we have, so it's really getting the numbers out that we have to do. And I'm not saying, just give an example, because we saw of course the Chinese in Tiananmen Square putting the tanks, but I think it just puts the pressure on. It's not going to be easy, and there will be people dying through it, but we really have to work at changing our governments non-violently rather than violently, because I can assure you if the Oromo change the Meles government violently, you'll be turned to be the problem that Meles was within a matter of months. I can assure you. It is guaranteed. We have seen it with Isaias. We saw it with Meles. It will happen, because within the military structure you cannot have democracy. You cannot have debate. It's a command structure. One person is in charge. Sorry. So I don't think there's an option in that sense, and I think it's just dangerous for a lot of people. The creating the environment to allow, the three-party system reminds me of Nigeria, when Nigeria tried to force two parties, one a little bit to the left, one a little bit to the right, that collapsed. I don't think we can do it. I think these things are organic. Let people form as many parties. They will become irrelevant. They will merge. They'll come on. We cannot force democracy in that sense. So let's be organic. And for me, I keep saying, if you don't have 100 parties, fine. If you want to have, even allow independents to run. People should be independents. You can be in parties. We will get there, and they start forming over time. We shouldn't rush this process and say let's mandate it at that level. I think that for me is a dangerous way to go. Let's just open it. It'll happen. And I've found the most useful systems are those that are organic and people come to terms and they build them together. Ghana was amazing that it didn't fight, and Ni, I'm sure, was holding his breath thinking they're going to go there. But a number of things happened. I think they learned a lot from Kenya, because Ghana was critically involved. John Kufuor spent a bit of time. Kofi Annan, there was a lot of worrying about Kenya happening. The structures that allowed, I think it really was the chairman of the Electoral Commission just stood firm. He was, I forget his name now, but he stood firm and he stood firm. And apparently people were surprised he stood firm because he got a reputation of being quite alcoholic. But at this time he was very sober during the whole time of the elections and did it right. And maybe the answer is if we get the right people who find the moment in history to do the right thing. He spent a lot of time explaining to the Ghanaian people exactly what's going on. So they didn't lack information. Any complaint that was given to him, he investigated and came back with a full and comprehensive report. So he generated confidence in himself. So when he said this person has won, even if the margin was 20,000 votes plus, it went on. But I also think that there were issues around John Kufuor and the person who was trying to succeed him, and the fact that they didn't really work together, that also made Kufuor then step aside and say, you're on your own. I think had this guy been working closely with Kufuor, may not have been the same as well. So we're not out of the woods yet, even in Ghana. I think it's made a great step, but I think we shouldn't be saying that therefore it's there. And I think it's something we've got to keep trying to figure out. I've spent most of this week trying to talk about democracy with the Obama administration. I'm part of a group called the World Movement for Democracy that's organized by the NED. And we are asking the question. I think Bush gave democracy promotion a really bad name because it's now harder. It's harder now to talk about it, and so we are now saying democracy support rather than promotion, because it's not about war, going to war in Iraq and Afghanistan to get democracy. But I think there's a sense that there is that confusion among the Obama administration in terms of how to deal with this, how to move it, in which way. But we hope it's not going to be the same business as usual. I mean, we've had enough of that. I mean, even beyond the Cold War, the war on terror created very similar. Your law, as long as you're with us in the war on terror, you can do anything, and it just hurts us at the end of the day. And I think I'm hoping the Americans are getting that now, that it hurts them more dealing with it that way than dealing with what causes this instability that allows terrorism to build. So let's deal with that. And one takes some comfort in what Obama himself says and what he writes about these things, and you hope that Obama, who's a community organizer, that Obama is the one who's going to emerge over and above the other parts of it. And so far he seems to be keeping as close as he can to his roots, although there's issues, of course, back and forth around the transparency aspects. But I think he doesn't. I think he is serious rather than cynical about these things, and I think he understands that you have your space when you have a democracy. So I was very pleased with what Johnny Carson said in Nairobi. I mean, that's what's going to happen. Then we are in. It's a good way. We in the pro-democracy movement in Kenya have urged Obama not to visit, and if you want to see his grandmother, she can come to the White House rather than him coming to Kenya. It's a really bad signal at this point to this coalition government that's so repugnant in very many ways. And Howard hopes to be working with them. Maybe they'll be less repugnant after a while, but at this point they really are repugnant. I just find it difficult that anybody should visit them and they can bask in his sunshine. But it's something that needs to happen, and I think there are some countries that need to do a lot of work. I was saddened by the Ekiti State by-election in Nigeria. It's still going on, and we all, of course, watching what Zuma does in South Africa. We are hopefully. Maybe be a different line on Zimbabwe. I was talking to some Zimbabweans. There's not much hope as well there, and but democracy on its own is not enough. I think we're also trying to move towards accountability to be able to get what Africa deserves.
I would just add one comment. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. I would just add one comment, and then if you want anything else you want to say, finally, please do. I share his optimism about the direction of the new administration in Africa. I think the reason that there is such euphoria throughout the continent and throughout the Africanist community here in the United States when Johnny Carson was nominated was precisely because he is so committed to a foreign policy based upon certain core principles. And so I have no doubt that those will be the focus of our policy. The other thing that I think is just very important to emphasize in Mina's comment, because it really is an explanation, I think, for why Africa seems to be having such great difficulties relative to some other locations, was his comment about the importance of organic development of structures. And the related comment that you can get all the structures in the world, but if you don't have individuals that share a culture that allows them to function properly, the structures won't mean anything. And in the case of Africa, there's unfortunately, because of the colonial history, not been that kind of organic development. And so you have states constituted in which institutions were replicated from the West, and in which individuals did not build the kind of relationships and sense of common ground and common interest that emerged over time in Western democracies. And so that notion of organic development and the importance of individuals, even every bit as much as structures, I think are two very important observations that Mina has made. Is there anything else you want to add as we close?
No, I think that's fine.
Great. Well, I want to express my appreciation for a very stimulating, provocative discussion here, and to all of you for joining in the conversation. Thank you very much.